Are those three things sufficient? In 2020, Saudi Arabia held the presidency of the G20, and in those sets of meetings, bringing together countries that represented over 80% of the world's population, 80% of the income, as well as 80% of the carbon footprint, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, may God protect him, said the biggest challenge we face in delivering the 2030 agenda is financing. So it wasn't so much the technical aspects, but it was how are we going to pay for this? How are we actually going to drive sustainability changes? It's not, coming up with the better mousetrap, coming up with a technical solution, but it was more than that. So it's not a lack of good ideas, in meeting these challenges. We have scientific and engineering solutions for our sustainability dilemmas. A lot of them are in this room. I've had the opportunity to manage large engineering projects in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Sudan, and I used to think, that lawyers were bad, at coming up with ideas. You put 5 lawyers in a room, you have 10 solutions. You put 5 engineers, you have 15 solutions. And I think the difference, perhaps, is that engineering and architecture students, those who are attending this university and the faculties that are organizing this conference, they test things, they try again, they put innovation at the front of solutions mapping, and engineers and architects tend to learn from one another, at least this is my impression, and they form partnerships. The technical people will say, well, this is one aspect of a problem, oh, I did another one, and then they naturally kind of converge, where this is different than I think in other disciplines. You don't get it in some of the social sciences, for example. So I'd suggest that the financing deficiency that's noted by the Crown Prince does not necessarily mean the availability or lack of availability of funds. It can also be in the shape of misalignment in funding priorities, the lack of co-financing mechanisms or even silos that prevent us from seeing who shares our goals, thus preventing us from sharing the cost of development. And the question then becomes, how can partnerships help us navigate these challenges, and what sorts of partnerships, and how might the UN or UNDP assist in all of this? In UNDP, we understand the power of partnerships and collaborating and facing complicated challenges. We've been in Saudi Arabia since 1976. So the relationship that UNDP, specifically UNDP, has with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is almost generational. We're kind of here for the long run. And when new topics come up, if I scratch beneath the surface a little bit, somewhere in the history of UNDP and the Kingdom's partnership, some work has been done on that topic, which is quite interesting. So we have this long-term relationship. We're not going anywhere. We're fully funded and supported by the Kingdom through my accreditation to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So the relationship is a bit different, and we can move along with the struggles of the Kingdom in a way that other partners that come in and out of the Kingdom for a particular topic cannot. And this, I think, is a strength. So, look at the UN in that way, certainly for the students who are coming out of programs. The range and scope of activities that the United Nations can have in a country is quite diverse. So we have partnerships, with 18 different ministries on every topic you can imagine. And I'm not saying this to praise UNDP, but it's simply to recognize the importance of the partnership, right? It's that Saudi Arabia has plenty of capacity, but it knows that in order for it to reach its goals, it's not doing that in a vacuum, right? It's very keen on benchmarking itself against other countries. So in the G20, by the way, Saudi Arabia's G20 presidency was, I think, the best in the history of the organization. It was extremely engaging, it was extremely inclusive. In the think tank panels that I was part of, organized by APSARC, they had something like 700 think tanks that were contributing to that dialogue from all over the world. So that nature of the UN's engagement with the Kingdom is quite special. So I'm proud to be part of it. So how do we kind of leverage this connection and this power? Academic partnerships like those that we're forming today under the leadership of PSU are sometimes the most cost-effective means of addressing societal changes. Our work has demonstrated how partnerships were key for funding, making a solution feasible or scalable, allocating talents and experts, transferring knowledge, infusing research done by academia into research and development and implementation and much more. And that is rooted in the role given by UNDP by the General Assembly of the United Nations as an integrator and facilitator of other United Nations agencies in the system. In Saudi Arabia country office, so the office that I'm presently managing, we have also recently launched in end of November, An Accelerator Lab. This Accelerator Lab is part of a 100 countrywide global network of country offices. The lab is part of what UNDP calls the largest learning network, since no entity has the sheer breadth and footprint of the UN. So it's a way not only for us to have our connection in Saudi, but to reach out to these other 99 country offices of the UN and learn and gain from their experiences as well. All of them have connections with academia, by the way. And the laboratory, I think, fits in nicely with this dynamic ecosystem that we're presently experiencing here. We've partnered with the NBS College Entrepreneurship MBA, 14 other Saudi universities, and Babson College Collaborative in the US, and an SDG Challenge initiative that motivates small student groups to solve some of the biggest concerns facing Saudi Arabia, and then linking them to the private sector. So again, this partnership is not in isolation in academia, but how do you look for a partnership with the private sector, which is quite robust here, right, in Saudi Arabia, in a country that is a G20 country. How do you get those countries on board to advance some of those concerns? We are also convening an International Women's Day event at Princess Noor University on gender equality today for sustainable tomorrow. And we're just now discussing a partnership with KAUST, the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, to ensure sustainability and innovation are fundamentally woven into the coursework as well as the operations of that very technical STEM university. These innovative solutions are generated on university campuses that go far beyond simply technology. We were in fact talking about that a bit this morning. There's a tendency to think of innovation equals technology, and I think that that's probably a false premise. And certainly in countries that I've worked in that are lower economic standard countries, there are amazing indigenous solutions to problems that are absolutely innovative, but they don't always get they don't get the press because they're not necessarily technological. And one of the deficiencies of the SDG challenges we've done in the past, and I think anybody in Saudi Arabia can appreciate this, many of the solutions were an app. We just need to create an app. And this is a solution for everything in Saudi Arabia. There must be an app. There's got to be something on your telephone that can solve your problem. So we're trying to get students to think beyond a simple technical tool to make sure that no one is left behind and everyone can contribute and participate in a particular technological advancement. So where do we start? How do we start? This is kind of a big question. I believe that being here, speaking and learning from each other is a start. By having a conversation that bears in mind the synergies between Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. By talking about the challenges that are hindering our impact and development, and by co-learning and exploring opportunities, we'll be able to build robust and sustainable programs and projects. So where we align our efforts and not duplicate them, where we integrate, not compete, where we partner rather than divide. So these are areas that will ensure that our aspirations meet reality. With these few thoughts, I'll leave the floor, and I wish you all the best in the remaining portion of the conference. And I thank Prince Sultan University for inviting the United Nations to this event. And certainly we stand ready to continue to support the Kingdom, whether it's through our academic partnerships or government partnerships, private sector partnerships, NGO partnerships, to advance the SDGs. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Adam, for an insightful lecture. If Dean Al-Majid can join us. And now with an insightful lecture about the Kingdom's asset sustainability transformation journey with Engineer Turki Bukhari. Engineer Bukhari is the Vice President of Assets and Facilities Management in Expenditure Efficiency and Project Authority, which is part of the Vision's 2030 programs to develop and promote expenditure, project and assets facility managements in the government entities. Engineer Bukhari also has a bachelor degree in mechanical engineering from King Abdulaziz University and an EMBA degree from Arizona State University. He held a number of positions at SABIC and was also assigned with a crude oil to chemical project, COTC, as a project leader. This project is a joint venture between SABIC and Aramco, which is part of the Kingdom's 2030 Vision Loan Fellowship Program. Engineer Bukhari, welcome to the stage.
The mouse? طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, we'd like to thank Prince Sultan University for hosting us today, and it's our pleasure to be a part of this conference. And allow me to change the way of the presentation. It will be with slides, so it will be some boring slides, huh? So I'll take you, normally once we talk about sustainability, we'll think about green, recycling, and all these things. I came from industrial sectors, so sustainability is a very important subject for us. We talk about sustainability, greenhouses, and all these things. Today we'll take you through a different sustainability subject, which is sustainability of our assets, sustainability of our life, sustainability of our service that we provided inside our country. So the different subject is a little bit different than the norm that we have done it, but however, it will be, I hope it will be, inshallah, a very interesting subject. So, first of all, I'll not go through the content because it's very long content anyway. So we'll just go directly to a very inspiring quote or statement by the custodian of the two holy mosques, Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, Hafidhahullah, and it's talked about spending efficiency and how we should focus on spending efficiency. In addition to that, it is part of our 2030 vision to make sure that we are doing spending efficiency in our budget in the country, as well as increasing the quality that we provide to the citizens among the country. Also, another definition for what does mean spending efficiency, it's said that what increase impact against spending. So again, this is another speech, very inspiring speech, very inspiring quotes from the king, as well as His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed bin Salman bin Abdulaziz. He talked about spending efficiency, increasing the quality of our life in our country. So, first of all, let me give you a brief about EXPRO, or Introduction of Expenditure and Project Management Efficiency Authority. So, the authority started before 4 years or 5 years almost in 2015, started with a program called Mashru'at, and that program was looking for the project management in the country as well as asset and facility management inside our country. And after that, we have a Center of Spending Efficiency, which is in 2016, has been established also, which talk about procurement, spending efficiency in the country. Then after that, key findings in both Mashru'at as well as the CSE was developing the national manual for project management, which is the guidance that we are using now with the entities inside the country, as well as the asset and facility manual, which is used also inside the country to help the entities inside our country. Key findings from the CSE, we call it a Center of Spending Efficiency, 420 billion has been saved from the budget that we allocated for projects, doing efficiency projects, doing optimization in several aspects that we are doing inside our country. That's for the 5 years that we work with them. As well as contribute to the issuing of the government tenders and procurement laws. So we introduced the procurement laws inside our country, and to help a lot the entities that we have it inside our country. In 2021, Expo has been established, which is a merge between the two projects, the project management and asset and facility management, as well as CSE. So it has been merged together and came to an Expo, which is Exponential Project Efficiency Authority in 2021. So what is our key point that we are working on it? We are working on the project management, so we help the entities inside the country to do the project management. Sometimes we do execution with them and help them to execute the project. We have several projects we introduced inside it. So we have King Khalid University in Asir, we work with them. We have Taiba University in Medina, we're working with them. And we have several giga projects that we are working inside the country with them in order to ensure that it will be delivered on time and with the quality that's required. Also, we work with the whole entities inside the kingdom with regard to asset and facility management. So we work in operation, maintenance, as well as procurement, in order to make sure that procurement is done as per the procedure that we implemented, as well as asset and facility management should provide the service that we require from our side. In addition to that, we look at the investment, the 5-year plans that we developed by our country in order to make sure that we execute the project required. For example, if we need to build a hospital in one of the countries or one of the areas, so we look to the area, we see the demand in that area, we make sure that this area is required the beds or the hospitals that are required for that area. And then we give them the approval with the help of the entity itself in order to execute it and do the project on time and within the schedule that's required for it with the cost that we allocated for them. So this is the major things that we are doing, as well as the procurement system. We introduced the procurement system to the government and we worked with them hand to hand through a platform called I'timad. So now, whenever you have a procurement session or procurement process, you have to go through I'timad, raise the procurement purchase order, procurement purchase request, and all these processes will be through the system, and it will be come to us to review it and make sure that it is as per the process that we have done it. So this is in brief our entity, our authority, and this is the major key function that we are working on it now. So we developed policies and strategy, we propose process and regulation, we study exponential breakdown, and we establish joint working team. So what we have done recently, we introduce our team to work with the entity inside the entities. For example, if you have a project, we'll send our team in order to work with the entity in order to make sure that the implementation is done as per the required procedure and system that we introduced to them. Development of metrics and standard. We have developed standards as well as the standard that we shared with you, the National Manual for Maintenance and Operation, the National Manual for Projects, and we do reporting. So each entity, we develop the report with regard to their projects, with regard to their procurement system, with regard to spending efficiency, with regard to asset and facility management. So it's a communicated report. We send it to the entity, some of them monthly, some of them quarterly, some of them half-yearly, some of them bi-yearly, we send it to them. So all these services is done by a complete team inside our entity. So we work together with the entities in order to enable them, building the capability and methodology inside the entities, as well as developing sustainable institutional solution for them. Entities will explore the efficiency initiatives, they will implement it, they will achieve this building efficiency objective within the end of the project. So, before we start, why I selected the asset and facility management and why the authority is focused on this area. This is the spending in the government with regard to operation and maintenance, or asset and facility maintenance. So you can see it's averaged between 84 billion Saudi riyal per year. And if you take the last 5 years, it's almost 420 billion Saudi riyal. Is it worth to look at it or no, guys? It's worth to do. So this is the reason why we focus on it. We have huge number of funds that being funded to the entities, and we have seen that some of the entities struggling to provide the quality and the service that required. For example, hospitals, universities, schools, whatever we have general asset and facility management that we are looking at it inside our country. So, before we go to the details of our journey, how we do the transformation with them, I'll just give you some brief about what does mean asset. So asset is an equipment, building, roads, anything that we work on it inside our country. And we are focusing in that because we have financial, like stocks and whatever, and we have non-financial, which is tangible, intangible, like IT software, tangible, which is equipment, building, dams, whatever. So this is what we are focusing on it in our authority. So this is a picture from our country. So we have roads, hospitals, university. Sorry, we did not put your pictures. And we have dams. By the way, this is the dam in Saudi Arabia. So we have almost 400 dams inside Saudi Arabia, by the way. Okay? So, and facility is a complex or systems that containing of assets, and it serves the purpose for the citizens or for the employees. So, what is the current practice? We have seen it. We work with the entities. We have seen several practices that good and several practices that need to be improved. So we have seen unstandardized processes. We have seen data is not available. So whenever you go to the entities, ask them about your assets, how much asset you have, what is the cost of your asset, how you do the preventive maintenance, you do the corrective maintenance, nothing. Just do it like this. Low operational efficiency, for sure. If you have these challenges, you will have low operational efficiencies, and ultimately it will be low customer satisfaction whenever you go to the any entities. Not all of them, but this is the majority that we have seen. So what we need to do, we work with the entity hand to hand to make standardized processes, database asset management, we build system, and we help them to build the system and enable them, high operational efficiency and high costs, customer satisfaction in the lives. So this is our ultimate goal and our ambition to go toward the excellence in our asset and facility management. So this is the journey that we have done it, and we explained it before. 2015 مشروعات, 2016 Center of Spending Efficiency. In 2019, we have developed something called the National Manual for Asset and Facility Management, which is the procedure and the standard that we have mandated to the government now. We have got the approval from the board, and we are working with the Minister of Council in order to approve it for the whole entities inside Saudi Arabia. So, what is the Asset and Facility Management Manual? The main objective of this manual is to build standard inside the kingdom or inside our country, also building asset management system, enhance operational excellences, and improve the efficiency and quality that we require inside our facility and buildings that we have in our country. So, the manual contains of 6 pillars. It talks about the organization of the entities, it talks about supply chain, strategic asset management, maintenance management, operation management, and data performance. This manual contains of 17 volumes, and all these volumes is included in that manual. And this manual, by the way, is free, and it is shared with anybody who can use it, and it is being used by the whole entities. And we have a bar here, you can just scan it and see the brief about the manual in English and Arabic. This manual has been reviewed by a committee, including some ministries and royal commissions, Aramco, SABIC, royal commissions, and several entities. They work on this manual in order to ensure that it is up to the speed, up to the market, up to the standard that they require, and it has been approved by them. We have several strategic partners we are working with them. We are not working alone. So we have several strategic partners, we are working with them. We're working with local content, we're working with Sabahi, Tarshid, and the sustainability of lights and energy. And we're working with Kroll Accounting, NCGR, and the rest of the entities that we're working with them. So, this is the main objective or main subject that we'll talk about it, how we do the transformation journey and how we do sustainability with the entities. So I'll take you through very brief, then I'll go to the details. So first of all, we do a kick-off or initial perception with the entities. We select the entity and we work with them. How we selected the entities? We cannot work with the whole entities. We have almost 520 entities inside the government. So we cannot work with all of them. So what we have done, we developed the criteria in order to select the entities that we work with them. How we developed that criteria? We talked about the portfolio analysis, so how much they have asset and facility management portfolio, then the impact that they have done it in the country, then after that, how the reaction between us and them, how we can do the implementation with them. And we have selected almost 16 entities that we work with them now, and we are focusing in 12 entities in detail. Entities, I mean ministries or universities or whatever that we have it inside our government sector. Then after that, we do scope of work identification. We do something called maturity assessment. So we send our team to the entities and they do maturity assessment. They do assessment for the entities based on the national manual that we have shared with you before. So we do documentation audit as well as we do implementation audit. So we go to the sites and make sure that the sites are up to the speed, up to the quality that's required by our national manual. Then after that, we develop target operating model with them, as well as we do building asset management system. We have seen that most of our asset and facility systems is not available inside our entities. So we work with them and we do the implementation as well as make sure that the asset management system is available for them. Then we do quick wins, we do improvements. So we'll develop the contracts. You know, operational maintenance is talking about contracts. So we work with the contractor, we develop the contracts, we make sure the contracts is up to the speed, up to the quality that's required, and we do improving efficiency. So we put the KPIs, we monitor the contractor in order to make sure that they will deliver the service as it is required by them. And then after that, we do monitoring and dashboard and sustainability for the facility that we have. So, allow me, this is the last slide by the way, so not be any more slides. So allow me just to go through the process in a little bit detail. So first of all, we start with number one, so engagement. So engage with the entity as explained to you. Then we review the plan. So I have talked about the maturity assessment, and it talked about the 6 pillars that we explained before. Just allow me to, yeah. So this is the 6 pillars that we talked about it, and we do the audit and the maturity assessment around these 6 pillars in order to make sure the entities, they will be aware about what's going on in their sites. Then after that, we do asset registration awarding plan. So we work with them in order to do the asset registration, and we selected the pilot. So what does mean a pilot? For example, if it's a Ministry of Health, so we selected a hospital that will implement all the manuals and the aspects that we explained to them in that hospital. Because we cannot implement it in the whole Ministry of Health, so we selected the site, we call it a pilot site, and we do the audit. We make sure that the implementation of the process will be there in order to sustain the systems in that area. Then after that, we generalize it in the ministry at all. So this is very important selection, and it will be based on criteria that we have it. Then after that, we go to the setting baseline. So we do baselining for the maturity assessment. Normally start from 0 up to 5, where 5 is the best and 0 is the lowest. And we are targeting at this time, when we started, to have at least number 3. So 3 is a mature organization, or it's a mature organization that they can run themselves by themselves. So this is the trick that we have used with the entities, because once we do the maturity assessment, most of the entities, they are below 3. Not most, all of them are behind 3, based on our aspect that we have done it. So what we have done, we put a plan for each entity to achieve at least 3 for the time being, in order to make sure that they will be up to the speed and to the quality that we require from them. Then after that, we do something called direct purchase and contract extension baseline. What we have done and what we have seen in the entities, that most of the contracts, most of the issue that they have it around the contracts and how they manage the contractor. So we work with the entities in order to make sure that they have a baseline for the contract, there is no extension, there is no issue with the contract, that we are working with them. Then after that, we have target operating model baselining and customer satisfaction baselining. Imagine that we have seen customer satisfaction is below 20% in some of the entities. It's very difficult to measure. Honestly, we put a target 70% when we have the customer satisfaction. We reach 50, 30, 40, average is about 50% in the entities that we work with. And there is no surprise, because we have seen several difficulties in the entities. And by the way, spending is very high, 84 billion per year. Okay, so after we're setting the baseline, we go and do implementation. So we do implementation on the pilot site. So the people will go to the site, work with the entity hand to hand. See, this is visits from our team in order to make sure the entities will have the right and optimum equipment and contractor who do the job for them. This is by the pictures of some visits to several areas that we have it. And we have huge investment, honestly, and huge assets inside our country, by the way. Then after that, we do, part of our job and the mandate that we have it in asset and facility management, localization, or in Arabic call it توطين وظائف السعودية. So the contract, we make sure that percentage of Saudization will be in that contract. So whenever we have a contract for asset and facility management, we ensure that the contractor, he will have Saudization in that contract, from female and male. And this is part of our job also, in order to make sure that the contractor, he will have the right people and develop them, by the way. Not only just have Saudis in the maintenance or operational team. No, we have to make sure that they are developed and taking care of them. And by the way, we have started with the leadership, and we are working now with the skilled and the skeleton team and the contractor. So this is again one of our jobs that we are doing. Then we do the transformation plan. And we do training. We do training for the entities. We have trained almost 7 entities last year, with almost 1,300 employees being trained in the national manual that we have explained to you before. Finally, continuous enablement. So we develop a dashboards for the entity. So no more paperwork. We have a dashboard in our website, called Expert website. So we developed the dashboard. First dashboard, we talked about direct purchase and contract extension. We are targeting this than 5%. Why we are targeting this number? Whenever we have direct purchase or contract extension, it means additional cost. And we have seen it almost 20 to 40% additional cost if you go with extension of the contract or you go to direct purchase. Because the contractor will see that you are struggling, and he will give you the highest price in the market. So make sure that it is less than 5%, and I'll show you the dashboard that we are working with it now. So it's blank, so we have percentage of the portfolio for the area or the entity. So the total amount of contract, total number of contracts, then how it's going on in the entity, starting from 2 years, because the cycle of the contracts inside our country, it's almost taking 1 year, from the initiation until the award. So we alarm the entity. You have less than 1 year, you have 2 years, you have more than 2 years. And then we have amendment of the contract and direct purchase of the contract. So the leader or who's taking care of the asset and facility management in the entity, he will see this dashboard in his office, and he will monitor the contract within his area. We are targeting customer satisfaction to be higher than 70%, and hopefully, inshallah, we'll achieve this by 2023 for the entities we are working with them. And then we'll do also maturity assessment. As I explained to you, we are targeting 3. And we are developing enablement dashboard for the entity. That dashboard will show the entity how they are working inside their facilities. So, sorry, this is in Arabic, so I'll just skip it to the dashboard. So each entity, they will have their KPIs and objectives for their asset and facility management, starting from the portfolio, their asset cost, because we don't know the asset cost now. If you ask any entities, they will not know. We are working with them now to do it. Then after that, we do the maintenance indicator. So whenever we are above 2, it means you are spending too much in your area. So, and again, the localization, we are targeting 90%, 85 to 90%. So wherever you are more than 85, it will be green. Then we talked about asset and management system, then MOU, and we are residing a team. So we are putting a team resided in the entities. So they are working with them hand to hand in order to make sure that the implementation will be done. Then after that, we do contract status as explained before, due, maturity assessment, projects, if they have projects, because what we have seen, most of the entities, if they have a project, they focus on the execution and make sure that the project will be completed on time. Whenever they complete it, they forget that they have to run and maintain that project. So we make sure that the project is well equipped with operation and maintenance contractor in order to make sure that it will be operated once it is handed over from the project. Then we do end user satisfaction. We have operational KPIs like PM versus CM percentage, utilization, and all these technical KPIs that we have to monitor the contractor whenever he do his job. Then we have a percentage of our project. We have a meeting with them, executive meeting and core team meeting with them, and all of these will be available for the leaders inside the entity in order to make sure that their facilities are maintained and operated well. That's it from our side. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy it. I hope.
Thank you, Dr. Majid can join us for a token of appreciation. What an informative presentation. Thank you. And now, ladies and gentlemen, with a lecture about the required policies to advance innovation and sustainability with Engineer Fahad Al-Ajlan. Engineer Fahad was appointed as the president of the King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center. Prior to joining CAPSARC, he was the director of the Hydrocarbon Sustainability Program at the Ministry of Energy, where he was responsible for looking at the long-term energy trends and their impact on energy markets, including global demand for oil and gas. Additionally, he oversees the Circular Carbon Economy National Program, which aims to utilize a comprehensive framework to manage emissions while furthering the socio-economic development of the kingdom. Engineer Fahad holds a bachelor degree in mechanical engineering from North Carolina State University and an MBA from Stanford University in California. Engineer Fahad, welcome to the stage.
First, I would like to thank you for the kind invitation, and it gives me great pleasure to be here at this sustainability conference at Prince Sultan University. First, let me just give a quick brief and an overview about King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center, or CAPSARC. The center started 12 years ago. It's been, the results of dialogue between producers' nations, such as Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Gulf countries, and consumer nations, the US, Europe, and other countries. Especially leading up to 2008, when oil prices reached 100 plus and 140 something dollars, there has been a lot of discussion around, what drives oil prices higher, what drives them lower, what is happening with supply and demand, and there were a lot of concerns about, inflation and other issues that were troubling economies. And so the King Abdullah Petroleum Center was started with this objective. The objective was to advise policymakers, local but also global, around energy policy and how can we bridge the gap between policy objective and policy design. And that is done through fact-based and applied research. The point was that we would, instead of pursuing common received practices, we would actually look at these practices, analyze them, and come up with the research that is required to advise policymakers. And so this has been ongoing for 12 years. Today at King Abdullah Center, we have around 6 programs. The first program is around oil and gas. We have a program on electricity markets and renewable. We have a program on transport and urban infrastructure. We have a program on climate and sustainability. And we have a program on energy macro and microeconomics. And so the title of the talk is around how can we design policy to advance innovation for sustainability. But let me maybe take you back. I'll take you back to 1992 and the Rio Conference. This is when climate change discussion started. There has been a realization that the world has been warming for a while. And this was a result of industrial development and emissions that are coming from Earth and being trapped in the Earth atmosphere. And the globe was warming at an unprecedented rate that we have not seen for the past 30,000 years. And the discussion has been focused on how can we limit this warming. And it's been proven that this is because of human activity. We already have carbon, and carbon is not a bad thing to have. The problem is with having CO2 emissions that are being trapped in the atmosphere, and not having a balance between the carbon that is being emitted by the normal processes, but also industrial processes, and what the oceans and Earth can handle. And so in 1992, there has been a discussion around what can we do globally as countries to limit this global warming or climate change. And today, and this was followed by the Kyoto Protocol in 1997, and then the Paris Agreement in 2015. And in Paris, there has been an agreement around few principles. One of them is common but differentiated responsibility. What does this mean? It means that we're all responsible for overcoming climate change. However, different countries are responsible differently. And if we talk about advanced economies, like the US, Europe, and others, then they have more responsibility because they've been developing at a faster rate for longer. And so the emissions they've emitted has been higher than what developing economy and developing nations like Saudi Arabia, China, and other countries have done over the past years. And so this first principle of common and differentiated responsibility basically started all of the discussion that we hear today around what we want to do, around limiting the impact of climate change, but also mitigating it. How can we lower our emission going forward that we can actually avoid this increase in temperature? And the scientists agree that beyond 2 degrees above pre-industrial age is the limit. And there has been a try at Paris to keep 1.5 degrees above the average temperature pre-industrial age to 1.5. And so this is how the discussion started. What does this have to do with sustainability and policy and innovation? If you have been old enough and you've been born in the 80s, if you drive around Riyadh, maybe now it's inside Riyadh, but before it was outside Riyadh, you would find the solar village in Riyadh. This started in the 80s, and it was a discussion around what alternative sources of energy we can bring on that is more sustainable, that would limit emissions, but also would be something that is more sustainable. And so this started in the 80s, and yet it did not gain traction until the last 2 or 3 decades. A lot of the investment that has been done by countries like Germany, the US, other European countries, helped lowering the cost of renewable. And today, renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy when it comes to generating electricity. We have different forms of energy. So when we're talking about electricity, it's different than transportation, it's different than petrochemical, it's different than other sectors. And so we've made huge strides when it comes to renewable energy and lowering the cost. Because of the investment, this was in the form of subsidies and setting targets for renewable in a lot of countries. And then China invested a lot in developing industrial capacity, and as the capacity for solar and similarly for wind increased, cost falling down. And all the countries in the world are reaping this benefit. And if you go now to a lot of countries, including Saudi Arabia, we're talking about the cost of renewable being the cheapest one. It doesn't make sense that you would use oil and gas, especially for what we call peaking generation. Because the profile of solar and wind is different. It's not energy when you want it, it's energy based on a certain profile. And so for solar, it starts from sunrise until sunset. Beyond that, you don't have that form of energy. And the same thing for wind. When the wind blows, you would have wind energy. When the wind does not blow, then you don't have energy. And over the last 3 decades, the focus of policy has been around how can we go around renewable energy. And so there has been a lot of investment, there have been a lot of target that has been set for renewable energy and how much it should generate out of our energy mix. And unfortunately, that's the wrong policy. Because policy should not be driven by what we think is the long-term benefits. Yes, there is something that we need to talk about for long-term benefits. And so, what is our long-term objective? Our long-term objective is to get to net zero. And if you allow me maybe to define what do we mean by net zero. Net zero means that the emissions that are emitted by the globe versus the sinks that are available in the globe would basically constitute zero. So the pluses and the minuses, if you add them up, are zero. And so the sources of emission could be from hydrocarbon, could be from methane emission, could be from landfills. All of these are emitting, greenhouse gases. What are the sources of sinks that we have? Usually, it's the land. Land would, capture CO2 and other greenhouses. It's trees that usually, in their normal cycle would, take CO2 and emit oxygen. And oceans. And oceans usually have a huge capacity to absorbing CO2. However, and this is something that has been discussed over and over, especially in Paris. When you look at the Paris Agreement, there is no mention of oil and gas. There is no mention of hydrocarbon. There is no mention of coal. And this is an agreement that has been ratified by 192 countries, including Saudi Arabia. So why is the focus on renewable? It's not that renewable are bad. Renewable are great. And the benefit that we are having today is a result of a lot of the investment and policies that have been done to help renewable grow. If you look at Saudi Arabia today, the cost of a kilowatt hour generated from solar is the lowest in the world. It's around 1 cent per kilowatt hour. If you look at the electricity tariff that we have in Saudi Arabia, we're talking about 5 to 10 cents kilowatt hours. And so solar is, and renewable is the lowest cost energy when we're talking about electricity generation. However, it's not the answer, because what we aim to is to bring a balance to this carbon cycle. And so, if 192 countries in the world agreed that hydrocarbon are not an issue, coal is not an issue, gas is not an issue, why are we so focused on making sure that we phase out the use of them? We understand that there are negative externalities to these common sources of energy. When you burn oil, gas, or coal, they will emit CO2 to the atmosphere. But the focus, and if you go to the Paris Agreement, it's around emissions. It's saying that we need to address emissions. So the issue is emission, not the source of the emission. And so when we focus on policy, when we develop policy, it's very important that we address what is the cause and what is the negative externality that we have rather than the source. And today we're seeing some trouble happening in some parts of the world around this issue of having the wrong policy. If you look at Europe, for example, over the past 12 months, electricity prices have gone up between 3 to 12 times. Industrial production had to stop in Europe. Even in China, there was rolling blackouts for industrial consumers and some residential consumers. Why? Because there has been a lot of focus around the use of renewable, not enough investment, and incorporation of reliable sources of energy. Energy that you can have when you want it. Oil and gas could be stored, and you can have it there when you need it. You can flip a switch, and it's on. Unfortunately, with wind and solar, even though they're great sources of energy, you cannot do this. And even if you have batteries, and battery costs, for example, are falling down significantly, yet if the wind does not blow for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, what can you do with batteries? A battery can help you overnight. They can help you for a few hours to extend your profile for solar, for example, or wind. But they cannot help you with 2 or 3 weeks of no wind, which we have seen in the UK, for example, this past summer. And so when we design policy, we need to make sure that we design the right policy. We need to know what is our objective. And we need to make sure we don't mix between the long term and the short term. And so this past October, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman unveiled the Saudi Green Initiative and the Middle East Green Initiative. And the focus around these has been, first, he announced Saudi's aim to become carbon neutral or achieve net zero by 2060. He doubled the nationally determined contribution under the Paris Agreement. Under the Paris Agreement, each country will say how much emission it will reduce. Saudi doubled their contribution. It was 130 million tons of CO2 emissions, which is, and it has been doubled to 278. 278 is more than the emissions of a country of Belgium. So it's a huge, huge increase. But also, it distinguished between short-term and long-term strategy. The long-term is in 2060, we want to be net zero. But by 2030, we want 50% of our generation of electricity to come from renewable. And that is clear, because you cannot, focus on the long term and design your policy like you know what is going to happen over the next 5 years or 6 years. It's very easy for you to predict and forecast what is going to happen over the next 6 to 7, 8 years. But over the long term, it's very difficult to do this. And if you ask people what the world is going to be like in 2060, it's almost impossible to predict this. If you ask the people to predict what the world is going to be like in 2030, it's much easier to do this. It's not easy, but it's much easier. And so when we're designing policy, we need to make sure that we have a policy that keeps in mind the long term, but is very focused on the short term. And it needs to be transparent. Because otherwise what would happen is everybody will be going in different directions. And especially in an economy that is complicated, huge economy like Saudi Arabia, like China, like the UK, you need to make sure that the short-term targets are transparent and the private sector can achieve those targets. And we need to distinguish between what is happening in developed economies versus emerging economies. For example, if you look at the UK, for example, is aiming to lower its emission by 50% between now and 2030. But do you know when the UK emissions peaked? 1978. Germany, 1980. So it's very easy for a country that has already industrialized, developed, has moved beyond heavy industry and focused on services to lower their emission. For emerging economies like Saudi Arabia, China, other emerging economies, India, and so on, it's very difficult to achieve this. Because the development cycle, in the economic development cycle, you go from being an agrarian economy that's dependent on agriculture, and then you start developing the extraction mining industry. Then you start developing the industrial sectors, and then you move into the services, whether it's tourism, financial services, education, others. And so it's very difficult to compare, and this is what I've seen. When people design policy and look at policy, they compare, for example, a country like Saudi or a country like China with a country like the UK. And they ask, why cannot, China cannot be like the UK? It's very important to know that the UK has been industrializing for 200 years. China has been doing it for 40 years. And so in our prescription for policy, when we're designing policy, we need to make sure that we account for these different national circumstances. Again, I'll go back to the title of my presentation. How can we design policy to encourage innovation that would get us to sustainability? If we're saying 50% of our energy or electricity will come from renewable by 2030, what can we do today to help that? It's very difficult for technology to emerge between now and 2030. 2030 is right around the corner. Actually, if you start building a project, it probably take you 2 to 3, sometimes 5 years to get it done. So the role of technology today in achieving your short-term, objective is very minimal. What you want when you're designing your policy is to make sure you pick the right technology. And so when you say 50% of my electricity will be from renewable, that's great. Because it's easy to see, it's a technology that's already there, It's around implementing it and lowering the cost. What our role for technology should be is what can we do beyond 2030? The lessons that have been learned from Germany, the US, and other countries that invested in renewable is they lowered the cost, and so we're benefiting today. What we need to think about is what will be renewable, the new renewable in 20 years' time. And so that's what we are focusing on today when we're designing policy. And again, the focus has been mostly in energy and climate because this is what CAPSAC does. And so there are 2 or 3 different technologies that we're focusing on. The first is around hydrogen. Hydrogen is a form of energy. It's a carrier of energy like electricity. It could be produced from coal, from gas, from oil, nuclear, renewable, and so on. The cost of producing hydrogen from renewable today is much higher than the cost of producing it from hydrocarbons. But even if you produce it from hydrocarbon, you can capture the CO2 emission, the greenhouse gases, and it can be a clean form of energy that you can use in utility, you can use in transportation, and lately there has been a slew of projects here in the kingdom that actually will use hydrogen. In the Royal Commission of Jubail and Yanbu, Princess Noura University, and others, to use hydrogen for transportation. Our role also looking at, for example, what is happening in New York, which is the Green Hydrogen Project, which is one of the largest investments ever in hydrogen, $5 billion. It's tried to bring the cost down on renewable to actually generate hydrogen from renewable, because that is a much more sustainable form of energy. But also we need to focus back to the aim of the Paris Agreement. We said emissions versus sinks. And we know that, for example, we can plant trees, which is great. And the kingdom has an ambition of planting 10 billion trees over the few coming decades here in the kingdom. But at the end, it's costly, and we need technology. And so we need negative emission technology. This could be capturing CO2 and storing it underground. This could be something that we call direct air capture, which basically you take any air, including here at the university, you bring a unit, it would bring in air, capture CO2 from it, and only emit air to the atmosphere. And then you can store that CO2. And so when we're designing policy, we need to make sure we keep 3 things in mind. First, transparency. If you design a policy that is not clear and transparent to the private sector, it will be impossible to achieve. You would have an issue of lack of communication, lack of direction, and your stakeholders will not be aligned with your objective. The second is funding. How can we fund technology? And so this is where the roles of universities, research institutions, even private sector institutions come into place. How can we invest in the right technology and invest in developing the right technology? The third is deployment. How can we deploy it? Because if you go back to 40 years in the 80s, we started with the solar village in Aina, but that never moved anywhere. And so we cannot continue to have technology and research just always in the lab. You need to test it. Either it succeeds and you continue to pursue it and perfect it, or it fails but you move on and you look at the next technology. And so when we're looking at the role of innovation in sustainability, for 2030 I can tell you there is almost zero role for innovation and sustainability for 2030, because 2030 is just around the corner. But if we as Saudi Arabia and the globe want to achieve our ambition around fighting climate change, achieving net zero, then we need technology. The International Panel for Climate Change Experts, this is the utmost authority from the UN around climate change, said that 50% of the technology that we need to get to net zero has not yet been commercialized. 50%. And so with the technology that we have today, we know we cannot reach to net zero. And so that's why it's very important that we have the right policy to drive innovation to get us to net zero, make sure we live in a more sustainable world, as we grow. With that, I would like to thank you very much. Appreciate your presence and this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much for an insightful
Sorry for
talk.
interruption, Doctor. Doctor may kill me for that, but I can see most of the attendees is very curious. I can see many questions in the eyes. So can I excuse you for a 10-minute question and answer?
Sure.
Okay. Who would like to start asking? To Adam, if you would like to comment. I can see.
I'm fascinated by this. It shouldn't be me, it should be other participants. This was a fabulous presentation, as was the one before, because I think the issue of assets and facilities gets very little attention generally when we look at sustainability. So this was a wonderful presentation because of the huge potential that can be there and the ability to bring on advocates for sustainability from sources you wouldn't imagine, from a plant manager working somewhere, maintaining facilities. With CAPSAR, we had a partnership, my office with CAPSAR in the T20 and the G20. And what you said today makes a lot of sense. There is, of course, a lot of resistance in the United Nations community to this. So, Saudi Arabia is not playing the game properly. They really should just turn off the oil taps tomorrow. Of course, this is not viable. So how do you answer some of those things, particularly with regard to low-cost energy opportunities for rural communities, for the villages in India, and for China? What is the other side of this argument from a CAPSAR perspective on the viability of petroleum?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I think, back in November I attended Glasgow, which was, COP26, which is Conference of Parties, which is the 26th edition. And usually it's annual. This year it will be in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, and next year it will be in the UAE. And this is where the government delegations usually negotiate, the next phase of agreements. And usually you have a lot of attendance from think tanks, from private sector, from universities, academia, and so on. CAPSARC has an observer status, so you usually attend, and we usually attend the negotiation and report on them. Around, the question that you have asked, which is, again, it's, I've heard in Glasgow, for example, that, net zero is greenwashing, for example, and that we should actually be pursuing absolute zero, which is no oil and gas, no hydrocarbon. But unfortunately, even if we, have zero energy, there are emissions from other sources, whether from agriculture, land waste, and so on. But it's easy for somebody who enjoys, the luxury of having energy and the economic growth, unprecedented economic growth that has been provided by affordable and reliable energy, to talk about, greenwashing. But today, 3 billion people don't have access to clean cooking. Every day they go collect wood, charcoal, and human waste and use it to cook their food. This usually reduces, the average lifespan by more than 15 years. It causes a lot of health risk for children and women especially. And it hinders, the economic development of those nations and those, families that have it. So if 3 billion people today, out of, 7-something billion, don't have access to clean cooking, they don't have the energy to cook their food, how can we be particular about saying we cannot use this form of energy or that form of energy? I think, again, this is, a luxury that around half the world population don't have. And it goes against, the ambition that we have as developing economies, but also as, a nation, that we should not put prosperity and economic development on one scale and climate change on another scale. And if you look at, for example, what happened at COP26, and even though there has been a lot of accusation that Saudi Arabia hindering the negotiation and everything, it was actually the opposite. Saudi Arabia was constructive in providing a lot of, help in making sure the negotiation moved forward. And at the end, and this was obvious because the proceeding were, broadcast live, that China and India stop, the final, Glasgow agreement around the issue of coal. Because China and India consumes a lot of coal, and they felt that if we phase out coal, and instead they used phase down, they felt that this is against their own development. And if you look at, for example, the emission per capita in China, emission per capita in India, it's tiny compared to what is the emission per capita in the US or European and advanced economies. And so we need to go back to this, principle of common but differentiated responsibility. We're all responsible for climate change. But it cannot be that countries that have achieved their economic development would then use climate change to put down developing economies. Sorry for the long answer.
No, I cannot skip this without your comments. President Ruex.
Thank you for the comments, and I mentioned earlier yours as well now. I think the presentations were really informative and engaging. You hit on a really important point that I think many forget, and that is the fact that you are talking about emissions, not the source as much. And so I wanted to ask you, if you would, to expand a little bit on how you see the issue of emissions control, elimination of carbon, while still using hydrocarbons and other carbon-based energy sources. Where does the technology need to go in order for us to balance this emissions issue?
So again, it will be different depending on each country, but for a country like Saudi Arabia, where you have good natural resources, but also abundance of resources, whether we're talking about availability of oil, availability of gas, availability of renewable sources, when we're talking about solar emissions or wind speed, we're blessed. But also geological storage. We can easily, we have a paper that we published, and it looked at the capacity for geological storage for CO2 in the kingdom. And it could easily fit 40 to 80 years of emissions from the kingdom. And so by just being able to take, for example, CO2, capture it, especially at heavy industry, power plant that uses gas, for example, and taking that CO2 and just pumping it in the ground, that can help you in achieving this. But also I think it speaks about the other forms of energy that we discussed, around hydrogen and generating hydrogen, because if you can capture the CO2 when you're converting gas or oil into hydrogen, and then hydrogen itself is a free emission, carrier of energy. And so you could transport hydrogen to countries like Japan or Asia or Europe, which they can use then in their industry or their transportation, and it would be emission free. And so that's where we see the role of technology. Today, I think the cost of abatement for CO2 is around $100 per ton. And we need to bring that down significantly. And that's why the role of technology is very important. We would like to see, the cost of CO2 abatement come down similar to what we have seen with solar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Al-Majid can join us to the stage.